Hello and welcome to my new video. Today we'll explore fishing village close to Copenhagen. It's quite a small place and I will try to make interesting pictures today. My weapon of choice, like a M42 and the 50mm Voigtlander f1.2, and this is my last roll of COVID batch of Kodak 200. On all of my trips I usually use only one camera, or I have one camera additionally in the backpack. But for example, for me it's almost impossible to focus on the photographs and make videos at the same time, so this is a rare occasion when you can see how I shoot. Today I'm shooting on a box speed, and later we will discuss why it was a huge mistake. And because of really good weather, I quite fast ran out of film, and my usual rule to have one additional roll of film in my pocket. But these days I have a huge shortage of good film in Europe. I don't know why it's happening, but it's almost impossible to buy in stock, and probably you need to order if you want something good. I still have a one roll of Portra 400 in my Hasselblad, so I will continue shooting with this camera. Today for the metering I'm using this app on my phone and try to expose normally as a box speed. Lately my Hasselblad creates some problems with the mirror flap, and I think it's just happening because I'm not really using it a lot lately, and this old boy really requires some use and not laying down on a table in my room. And one of the reasons why I have these problems with the camera and rarely use it in comparison to my Leica M42, it's actually scanning and digitizing the photographs. Nowadays I'm thinking to completely skip the digitizing photographs directly from the negatives, because I don't really enjoy this process and I don't really care about social media anymore. So I post in Instagram only fun stuff and just occasional stuff what I have in my life. Instagram in 2022 is horribly overrated, and the quality of the pictures and the content there, it's completely not what I like in my life and completely not what I want to follow. So over the years my art changed a little bit the form and a little bit of presentation in a physical print and less in a digital way. So I spent half a day in this beautiful place and finished it up with a good wine and some snacks in a Danish classic way. And now let's go to development. I actually have a huge backlog of color film which I need to develop, so I bought this kit from Digibase. So it's a Digibase C41 kit. It should be fine for 14 rolls, and this is exactly how many rolls I have. So let's unpack it and check what we need. I also have a distilled water in my darkroom, so let's prepare chemicals and heat it up and start unloading film and start development. As you probably know from my channel, my usual kit is Tetanal C41 kit, and because I have a backlog of half a year of film in my fridge and it's slowly dying, I just bought what I have in stock. It's a little bit stupid idea to develop all the films with the new chemistry and never tested before, but I will strictly follow the instructions and hope for the best. So the first step is a pre-soaking, color developing, bleach, fix and stabilizer, and drying the film. One of the things what I like about this kit, it's already pre-diluted, so it means your chemicals is already stored in these bags and you don't need to do with them anything. And on the back side you have this chart on a one developer packet which have different rate of time for different quantity of films. And as you can see, this is a grade of 5 films, and you're basically adding 15 seconds for each 5 films what you want to develop. So let's remove array 4 chemistry from my Yoba CPU2 Plus and load the bottles for C41 chemistry. Because this kit have a separate bleach and separate fix, I need an additional bottle for these components. Probably already know I'm using the bottles from Yobo, and this is a classic kit of bottles and I reuse them multiple times. I try to keep them dry and clean and never store chemicals for the long period of time. In the manual for this kit they require to use 37.8 degrees, and this is actually 100 degrees in the empirical system, so So I don't really like this approach, and I really like the metric system and normal standards of dilution, temperature and consistency to go with these standards. The first problem what I see with this kit, it's how it's closed. And when you open this back, on top of the lid of the cap, you have this metal horrible closing cap. So this cap doesn't have a lift off, it doesn't have any things to pull it on. And as always, I don't really understand why the packaging of the chemistry is so horrible. As a person who worked in a chemical lab for a long period of time, I still don't understand why you're trying to invent packaging if it's already on the market and it already exists and you can use the industry standard chemical packaging. It's cheap, it's not require any additional costs, invention, and it's quite easy to use. And this closed lid and this type of packaging create a lot of struggle, and probably some stupid people will try to do it with the teeth. And for the final rinse, I'm using Edaflow from Edox. I don't really use precise mixing, so I'm using this jug and distilled water to create the chemicals, but as you can understand, my all C41 chemistry is already pre-mixed, so this is not really important and I just need to make one chemical for the final rinse. Because in the manual they already suggest to use the pre-rinse and washes in between of the chemicals, this is exactly what I will do. I will make a pre-wash and basically stop bath after color developer and the stop bath between the each chemical what I use. It's increased amount of waste water, but for the film I don't really care about it and I'm trying to do it more precisely than ever. When the film is room temperature, I will load it on the reels and I'm using this extension, and this is exactly the same type of drum what I'm using for the paper. You just have a core and the 5 different reels for loading 35mm film. Only one downside: if you want to develop more than 5 rolls of the film, everything should be dry out and you just wasting the time between the loads. Otherwise you need an additional drum to make it dry and second dry load and basically have a more batches to load in the same time. But because I never have so much film before, I usually collect or 2 or 5 rolls of film and this is enough. I will just split in half day of development and develop 5 rolls, dry them up and develop 5 rolls and dry them up again. Now I'm thinking to buy the changing back as a tent. Sometimes your hands getting sweaty in this bag and it creates more problems with the loading of the film, so be aware and be careful with the loading. I think already on this scale, if you develop more than 5 rolls of the film over time, you just need to completely switch to the different system or use a lapse, because develop more than that in your darkroom, I think you don't really have a consistency and you need a roll-to-roll system. I will set up the temperature to 37.8 degrees and plus minus 0.3 degrees as specified in the temperature setting in the manual. As you know from my channel, I using this modification of the Yoba CPU2 and measure temperature directly in the chemical drum. And for this kit I'm starting with the pre-washing film on the same temperature, and with the tethanol chemistry I usually don't do this step. But because in this kit it's in a manual and kind of a mandatory required, I just trying to follow the experience what the people suggest from the manual. It's quite easy process as always, you just need to think about the temperature stability and measure temperature inside the bottle and not inside the bath. And the first step is adding the developer, and the critical point here, you need to add it rather quickly, close the lid rather quickly, and at the same time you need to flip the drum and put the drum back in a rotation. And it's more important if you don't have a pre-wash, because if you have a pre-wash everything is wet and your developer is not so aggressive and you don't really ruin your film like this because of the uneven development of the sides. So you can usually add few rotations when you add the chemicals, close the lid, make a few rotations and put it in a rolling system, and from there just keep it for 3 minutes. and after development is finished, just put everything back in the bottle. And after you put chemicals in the bottle, I switch the temperature probe from one bottle to the next bottle to measure in the next chemical, and it will create more consistency. So I think if you have a circulator like I have inside the Yoba system, your temperature deviation can be inside the 1 degree difference. But if you don't have it, be careful, because your side bottles will be like 2 or 5 degrees off, and probably your development also will be completely off. I definitely not suggesting to buy the new Yoba CPU2 system, because in general this system doesn't worth the money, and temperature stability and temperature regulation in this system is far off from the ideal. And the deviation usually for C41 kits 0.2 or 0.3 degrees. But the most important thing about the temperature, it should be stable over the time of the first seconds of the development. So if you have a rapid temperature drop when you pour the liquid inside the bottle, you will get a strange and weird results with the color. It's the same thing with the development of the paper, so first seconds of development or exposure is more important than the last one, and here is more or less exactly the same. So the end of the minutes, it's actually finish up the process, and the beginning of the minutes is actually crucial for the temperature, color stability and the density of the film. And I think in this kit they're using a little bit different fix and a little bit different bleach. And it's not the same stuff what I have for C41 kit in Tetanal. I'm not sure if it make any difference. I think for bleach fix it should work fine. And the most crucial thing is actually developer. And the downside of the developer, which you never used before, it can be completely different grain, it can be completely different density, and in the same time the colors can be different and muted and so on. And what I don't like about the scanning, modern scanners usually use only full spectrum. So it means if you have a huge deviation in a cyan channel, it means you completely lost all the details in reds and you cannot balance it up with the light, because your RGB channels on the matrix more or less corrected to the same values. So sometimes your scanner will basically scan only red channel completely off and the whole picture will be completely off, especially if it's a little bit underexposed and you have a lack of details from the beginning and your density is really low. But nevertheless, this development of the 5 rolls of film is quite exhausting process, and I'm really not sure if it's sustainable if you do it at home constantly for color film. I think some people do it, but to get the best results, sometimes it's just not optimal. I prefer to make it one development of the 5 films and just waste the chemicals and never use them again. And this is one of the positive side why I choose this Yoba CPU2 system, because I can just buy the Tetanal kit for 1 liter, use it twice, and in principle this is one-shot development without any problems. And for the second set of film, I use a drum for 2 films, so this is how I spent my day. And now let's check the photographs, an example of the photos what I take from these rolls. I developed all the film, and it's 12 rolls, and it's actually take quite a lot of time on my scanner. So I just counted to scan one roll of film. You need around half an hour on not the perfect settings. And additionally, what I don't like about this scanner is actually color rendering. And because this scanner probably just use the cheapest whatever available on the market LED as a light source and RGB metrics like linear one for scan everything, it works quite, you know, precise and good. But in the same time, if you have errors or problems with the negative, it's not really perfect. For example, it cannot remove the dust, scratches, all the things from the negative, and additionally, if you have off-balanced negative, this is a huge problem for this particular scanner. And I think it's also the problem for the DSLR scanning, but for DSLR scanning, you can modify your setup and make it a little bit better if you're using RGB separate channel scanning, but this is additional topic, and for some reason nobody in principle doing this type of approach, which I don't really understand why. But in the next videos I think I will try to print from these particular negatives and just try how it looks and how it works in a darkroom and in classic printing on a paper. And I want to conclude the suggestion and my thoughts about this particular C41 kit. And the first downside of this kit is actually the quality of the result, what I get from there if I'm using the manual. So I definitely want to say the film was underdeveloped a little bit, but it's kind of a significantly changed the color rendition and the color rendering on the film, and I don't really like the result, how colors looks like. Second thing is actually grain. This particular developer, I think, created a huge problem with the grain, so grain became like huge and really big on the color film, which I don't really like usually. And this is not like in a good way, it's a nasty way, so it's a little bit bigger grain. And the color shift there looks a little bit strange for me, like I'm or using not proper temperature, but they suggest this temperature in the manual, or in the same time they suggest the pre-wash. And I think you need to drop like 30 seconds or even 1 minute more on this development. And so 3 minutes 15 seconds is just not enough to develop properly anything on this film. I'm not sure, so this is my thoughts. Probably in future I will never use this type of kit. Yeah, it's quite useful, you have a bags, whatever, it looks fancy, but I really like the one-shot approach when I can dilute half a liter, make one development of the 5 films and just throw away the chemicals, and I have consistency, I have a good results, good color. And the point with the overexposure of the film, so if you don't really trust your lab, or if you don't really trust your chemicals and so on, it's much better to overexpose your film one stop. First of all, the film can survive it easily if you develop it normally and if your developer is pretty fine, but 90% of the time in the chemical labs, especially cheap ones, your developer is already exhausted, they pushing the limit on the developer, and this one will help you to save your photos and save your result. Because you have more exposure on top, and basically you need a less time for developing exactly the same film. So it means if your developer is a little bit exhausted and in the same time your film is a little bit overexposed, you kind of getting landed on the good exposure and you don't really have these weird shifts. Like for example, in my case, it was a shift with the cyan channel, so it means my reds it's a little bit off, and with the digital scanning it's not really possible to get these reds in a proper space. And especially I don't like the Negative Lab Pro approach in the color grading and color editing, because it's from the beginning step, the color balance there, it's not really operate with the CMY color grade, it's RGB color grade wheel, and you don't really have this kind of an option to correct the film itself. You can correct the picture, but it's actually rotated 90 degrees the color wheel, so it's not really useful setup. So I think that's it for today. This was a pretty long video. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.